Let's take a look at the first square for this month, our chevron squares, and you'll notice it looks good either way. So you can actually put this square into your blanket, either right side up or upside down, and no one will ever know the difference, I promise. The first thing we need to do is take a look at our pattern, and we are going to be casting on 32 stitches with color number 503 Gift, but again, we are going to use some different ones. So I have iCat and Boho that I'm using this month instead of Gift and French. French is used for the contrasting color in the original square, but again, we are going to do something a little different, and my Carlton square was different colors than what I used for my Gossypium square, which is what I based this off of. You're going to follow that chart, and you are going to repeat the stitches between the red lines 5 times, and you're going to repeat the entire chart itself 4 times before you bind off. So it's a fairly simple chart to follow. It's mostly just the color work. So you have your blue squares and your white squares, and you just need to pay attention to whether you are working a blue square or a white square, and you have to decide which of these colors is going to be represented by a blue square or a white square. And what I usually do is I try to have the higher contrast color be my darker square in the chart, and I try to have my lower contrast color be my lighter square in the chart. So for me, in the previous one, I decided that mustard was really high contrast. So I was going to use that as my blue squares, and so that's what I've used as the blue squares in my chart. So I've made the base that slate blue color, and then I made the mustard my contrasting color. That's how I think of it. So this month what I'm going to do is I will make the base the iCat color in the blue, and I will make the contrast my boho. So I will start with this yarn and cast on with this yarn, and then I will add this one in a little bit later. Since I need to cast on my 32 stitches, I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I am going to show you how to work that very first row and how I deal with floats, which are these strands that are between the knit stitches in the orange color or the orangey yellow color. So this one is a float, this one is a float. You can see that there are strands of yarn that float behind the fabric, and that's what we're going to talk about, how to keep those from getting tangled, and also how to keep those nice and neat and soft and loose so that when we are working our pattern and we finish our block, that it looks really nice and it doesn't pull in or curl. So I'm going to go ahead, cast on those stitches, and then I will talk to you about working that first row of pattern. But let's look at our chart, and here's what our chart says. We are going to slip the first stitch, and then we are going to knit 1 stitch in the contrasting color, and then knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches in the base color. And we are going to repeat that, again, remember, repeat the chart 4 times, and then we'll finish with a knit stitch in the base color again. So since I already have my stitches cast on and I'm ready to knit in my base color, what I need to do is go ahead and bring out my contrast color and find the tail. So here's my tail. And all I'm going to do is go ahead and set my hand with my base color, and I am going to slip that first stitch, and now I'm going to hold my contrasting color in my hand. It's always a little tricky getting started, so you may have to readjust and readjust and just knit that stitch. So here's my slipped stitch and my first stitch in my contrasting color. Now, there are different things that you can do with your hands at this point in order to keep your colors straight. You can take this color and set it to the opposite side. So my base color is on one side, my contrasting color is on the other side. You can choose to be a continental knitter with one color, which I usually use my base color as my continental, and an English thrower or an English knitter with your contrasting color. So you can choose a couple of different things. You can carry both yarns in the same hand and just use them as you need. Or you can also do a combination of Portuguese knitting, which I really like. And you can actually carry this yarn as your continental and this one as your Portuguese, and you would actually wrap this yarn up around your neck and then just bring it down for the stitches where it's needed. So there's different ways that you can do your colorwork knitting, and there are different options for that. So now that I have slipped that first stitch, I've knit one stitch in my contrasting color, I'm going to knit 5 stitches. If I were not making a blanket square, then I would choose to wrap my contrasting yarn around this base color right now, 3 stitches in, and I would take this ball and I would just wrap it around so that it would catch the yarn at the back and I wouldn't have a 5-stitch float in my base color. But because this is a blanket square, I'm going to choose to go ahead and knit those 5 stitches in my base color, and then bring in my contrast color. But what I made sure I did was I stretched my knitting out and I spaced my stitches out so that I don't have a tight float on the back, because I want to make sure that when I knit this stitch, the yarn that stretches from the first contrast stitch to the second contrast stitch is nice and loose behind the stitches that separate it. Because if I don't do this, if I don't make those floats nice and loose, it will draw my knitting in, and then we'll have some problems later on. So I've gone ahead and started my second repeat by throwing and knitting that second stitch in the contrast color. So I'm going to go ahead and just knit 5 more stitches in my base color again. So there you can see contrast color, base color, contrast color, base color. And again, we are going to bring that yarn around and we are going to knit that yarn in and keep that float nice and loose in the back, because that's the key to good colorwork knitting, is you have to keep those floats loose. If I pull on this and I tighten it up, do you see how I squished all of my stitches up on my needle? It's exactly what will happen with your knitting. So you need to make sure that you spread those out and that your floats are nice and loose in the back. Now you don't want them super, super loose. If you have this big, loose float in the back of your knitting, then you probably need to tighten that up a little bit. You just want them to be gently loose so that they will float behind the fabric and make certain that you don't have a tight piece that you can't use. We don't want our piece to curl. We want it to be nice and flat, just like this one. We want nice floats, just like this one, where you can see that they're soft and loose and they don't draw the fabric in. So here I am ready to purl. I have my contrast color in the back. So we're going to slip that first stitch because that is what our pattern says. And then we are going to purl our contrasting color. So you can see that where our contrasting color sits and where the purl stitch is over here, it's pretty far away. But it'll be fine in your blanket. All you need to do is just go ahead and purl that stitch. And again, make certain that your float is nice and loose, because we're actually going to use this yarn to carry it up to that second row. So let me show you that one more time. All I've done is just gone ahead and purled that stitch. And again, I'm just going to make certain this is nice and loose, and we'll adjust it a little bit when we come to the next stitch. So I'm just going to bring this yarn up and out of my way on that right hand side. So now I've purled that one stitch in the contrast color, and now I need to do 3 more in the base color. So 1, 2, and 3 right there in that base color. And now I'm going to bring this over and purl 1. And it looks like I need to purl another one. And 2. So there we go. Now we've purled 2. And you can see that I've tried to make certain that I keep my floats pretty loose. Now I'm not really happy with that float, so I'm going to pull it just a little bit and adjust it because we're still on the edge. And I can do that. And now there, that float looks much better. It's still soft and loose, but it's not too soft and too loose across the back because we are trying to maintain a nice fabric on the front. And we're just going to continue to do that all the way across. We're going to repeat that. So looks like 3 purls in that contrast color, and then 3 purls in our base color. And it's important to make sure that you are keeping both the floats for the base color and the contrast color loose. Here you can see our float for our base color. And again, just keeping those floats loose is really important to maintaining the fabric on the back of your work. And if you can keep your floats loose, then you will be successful. And you'll note that I'm trying to keep my contrast color on the top, and I'm trying to make sure that as I work, that I always keep my contrast color on the top. And the reason that I do that is because of color dominance. And you can actually play with this at home and try it out, but if you switch your color dominance, so try to keep your contrast color on the top for a full repeat, and then try to keep it on the bottom for a full repeat, and you'll notice that there is a difference in the front of your work, and that you can see your contrast color better with one method than you can with the other. But I think you get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and finish up the pattern repeat, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. But you can clearly see that our floats are nice and loose across the back of our work, and I will show you my floats as soon as I finish that first repeat of the chart. And remember that we are going to be repeating that chart 4 times total before we bind off, or we're going to knit until our square is about 6 inches. So let me finish this up and then I'll be back with you. Here I am knitting the Chevron Stripes square, and you heard me talk about how I like to use a combination of Portuguese knitting and continental knitting. So I thought I would show you a little bit of what that looks like. So here I am. I have my contrast color around my neck and wrapped around my hand on one side. And then I have my base color over here. And all I do is I just use a combination of that Portuguese knitting and my continental knitting to go ahead and knit my piece. And I use my thumb to pull the color down so that I can grab it with my needle and knit. And if you do any Portuguese knitting, then you can check out how to do the actual knit stitch and the purl stitch. But I really like using it as a combination. I find it very fast. So here I am, I'm already halfway across my row, and I'm talking to you while I'm knitting. So this would be a little faster row if I were just knitting, but all I'm doing is just allowing that yarn to float across the back again. Remember, we keep working on those floats as we are knitting. And I'm just doing, again, that combination of Portuguese and continental knitting, which I find to be so useful in colorwork situations. And it's partially because I can keep all of my colors neatly tidied away, and I can also keep my floats nice and loose across the back, and I can continue to just knit, 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 knit all the way across that row. So here's how far I am. I'm very close. I'm about 2 rows away from having a full repeat done, but you can really see those chevron stripes coming out. So that is how I use my combination of Portuguese knitting and continental knitting with my stranded colorwork to achieve a nice even knit that is also pretty quick. I went ahead and finished that first repeat of the chart. So remember, we knit our pattern 5 times across the row, and then we're going to knit that chart repeat 4 times. So that's the very first one right there. And I have used that combination of continental and Portuguese knitting to achieve a nice fabric. You can see that my floats are still soft and loose, but they aren't too soft or too loose so that you would catch your fingers on them. We have both a nice fabric on the front and a nice fabric on the back. That's really the hardest part of stranded colorwork knitting, is that you're trying to keep those floats just soft enough that your fabric looks good on the front, but just firm enough that you don't really catch your fingers on them in the back. And some people like to twist their yarns with every single stitch so that they're really locking that fabric together on the back. I prefer to usually do a float of no more than 3 stitches long, but because this was a blanket, I did go ahead and choose to do that float for 5 stitches. It's not going to get the same amount of wear that a mitten or a glove or a sweater or socks would get. So I'm going to just go ahead and allow those 5-stitch floats. But again, in a regular project, I would probably go ahead and twist my yarn in every 3rd stitch if I have more stitches in a row of a single color than 3. So like I did with that background color, I said I would usually go ahead and twist this color in after the 3rd stitch because there's 5 total stitches. But I went ahead and left those floats long for our project because it's a blanket, and again, it's not going to be worn in quite the same way. Let's go ahead and take a look at our next square for the month.